Dudes podcast, we have a special guest. We have Cameron Cote. He has been on the show before. I interviewed him back in 2020 in the dark days. But back then, he was just starting up his podcast, and so we kind of figured we'd collaborate a little bit. And of course, he is the director of Calgary, of the Canadian Center for Bioethical Reform here in Calgary. And of course, one of our good friends is an intern with him. And so we really enjoy the work that they do here in Calgary and of course around Canada. So just give us a brief introduction of what CCBR has been up to lately, and I'll do some social media work.
Beautiful. Well, thanks Ken, for having me on.
He's not even going to listen. He's going to be like, just talk, and I'll do some other stuff.
On something else.
I'm promoting, okay?
Gotcha. I'll keep him busy.
No, so we enjoy to be on the show. I've been working full time for this Canadian Center for Bioethical Reform. I oversee everything that we do in Western Canada around the Pro-Life Guys podcast, and it's a wild time to be active in the pro-life movement for a lot of reasons. We are not only coming out of COVID, we're running the biggest internship that we've ever run out of Calgary before. We got about 15 or 16 university age students, one of whom you've had on the show recently. He's a little bit older than university age, and then we've got these fantastic volunteers doing some stuff with us as well regularly. An incredible team. We just had Jonathan Van Maren in town doing some Culture Wars content, and so we are 2.5 months into our 4-month program. We have already reached over 600,000 views of abortion victim photography. We've already had over 1,500 conversations with folks about abortion in Calgary, Regina, Vancouver, other smaller towns. It is a good time to be alive in the Canadian pro-life movement.
Fantastic.
Well, I am glad that I am alive, in the pro-life movement as well. Yeah, it's amazing, because I talk to a lot of people, and a lot of people are very familiar with, they're familiar with live action, they're familiar with, even Choice for Two and all these other programs and all that. But I find that the CCBR, it's been around forever. Jonathan Van Maren was part of it, or at least connected with it, and Jojo Ruba obviously was the big man, on campus and all that, and so. It's amazing to me. A lot of people are familiar with a lot of pro-life people and activists, but they're not quite as familiar with CCBR, even though CCBR is one of the biggest ones in Canada, is it not?
It totally is. We've got around 25 staff working year round. We bring on about 50 interns every year. We have a national reach of over 4 million views of our projects every year in person. We generally are logging around 10,000 conversations, and it's wild. I mean, especially with everything happening in the States right now, the number of times we're downtown talking to folks about abortion, they're oh, you guys came here after you won in America. No, we've been here.
No.
Now you show up.
Just open your eyes a little bit. I mean, we drive our huge truth truck around showing the reality of what abortion does to preborn children. We drop off postcards at almost every single house in Calgary. We have conversations on doorsteps, on street corners. We do displays on Mount Royal University and University of Calgary. We engage with as many folks as we possibly can on this important issue because there's so few groups that are doing that, right? We often talk about there being 3 distinct but collaborative arms in the pro-life movement, that you've got your pastoral groups, like you mentioned, Choice for Two, that are working to make abortion unnecessary, arguably, where they're trying to provide pastoral support and care for moms and dads in bad situations so that they don't feel like they have to have an abortion.
Right. I just thought, just a little note on that. I noticed that I had a big conversation with somebody last night, funny enough, who was commenting on our podcast, but they were accused, they were using the usual accusation that, well, what are you doing to help mothers? I'm well, probably a lot more than the pro-choice side, because one of the big criticisms they always lob is that, oh, well, you're not solving society's ills. I'm well, the pro-life side is probably doing more, and they actually are trying to solve the actual, things to actually give women a choice, a viable choice. Whereas one of the criticisms I usually give to the pro-choice side is you're pro-choice, but really what you're actually doing is you only want to give them one choice. Only one choice is acceptable. It's abortion. And any other choice is well, that's a terrible choice. Why are you even trying to create that option? So I thought that was an interesting conversation. I think it's great that pro-life groups are doing so much to try to create viable options, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. And two thoughts on that. I mean, one thing that I often say to people on street corners is, could we agree that nobody wants to have an abortion? Nobody wakes up and says, like, hey, maybe I'll become pregnant tonight so that 8 weeks from now I can have an abortion.
There is Lena Dunham. Lena Dunham?
Yeah.
And so very few
Dunham.
people, very few
Obscure people, but
people
yes.
Yes.
willing to do that. And so why in Canada, when the overwhelming majority of people having abortions don't want an abortion in the first place, are we ramrodding this down people's throats as their best option? Don't we have the opportunity and obligation to provide something better? And like you said, for Choice for Two, it's amazing looking at whenever they post a baby registry or gift registry for a child and a young mom, the number of people who try to log on and donate something, and within 4 minutes, everything has been bought up, everything has been looked after. And you see the comments of like, I've tried to support moms on like the last 25 occasions, and this is the first time I've ever gotten in time. The idea that the pro-life movement isn't committed to helping out these moms and dads is just absurd.
It's true. It's not like the pro-life movement is by far doing the most. And one of the biggest examples of that is the pregnancy care centers, which in many cases outnumber the abortion clinics. Like, what was like 5-1, 10-1, and most places in the States. I'm not sure what the situation is in Canada, but I know that there's quite a few.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet you look at where the pastoral arm of the pro-life movement is limited in that they don't know who's seeking abortions. We have this thriving pastoral arm of the pro-life movement, and yet we have 100,000 moms every year walk right past these facilities and head into the Kensington abortion facility or whatever the local abortion facility is. And so we need more than just pastoral support. Pro-lifers often will say, if only we had everything that moms needed, they would never seek out abortion. Well, no, unfortunately, in today's day and age, there's no way that we can make pregnancy easier than how easy abortion is perceived to be.
Yeah, I think in Canada, one of the things I've noticed is that, like, because abortion is so available, and so the only cause that pro-abortion advocates can find in Canada, like, this seems to be the only thing that they have left that they can, like, take over, is like accessibility. That's it. They're like, oh, we need to make it more accessible. It's like they need to fight because they just feel so empowered by the fact that they not only do they have abortion of any kind whenever they want and however they want, but they also have the power of censoring anybody who opposes abortion in many cases.
Yeah, that said, they are as well concerned about the growing pro-life movement, right? There's so many articles that are coming out in the Ottawa Citizen, the Toronto Star, Vancouver Sun, all these publications that are saying we have to be careful. We have to watch out for Canada's pro-life movement because they're young, they're dynamic, they are affordable, they're compassionate, all these
Be prepared.
Exactly. They're used to being able to label the pro-life movement as these old white men that just want to control other people's bodies, and then they see the pictures of the CCBR interns, and 4 out of 5 of them are these young women who are just so passionate about protecting newborn children and supporting their sisters around the world to give them better options than abortion. I think that legitimately there's a ton of people that are concerned about abortion access because they know that while we're a long ways off from what was just accomplished in America, there is a growing pro-life movement. And that growing pro-life movement is becoming more and more effective year over year when it comes to engaging pastorally, politically, and the arm that I'm involved in, the educational arm of the movement, that's trying to proactively engage people before they become pregnant, before they even think about the political component of this, getting people aware and mobilized on the abortion issue.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you one follow-up, but before I do the second question, I wanted to ask you, maybe, like, you said that there was 3 arms of the pro-life movement in Canada. Can you give us the other 2, just so we can get that?
100%. So you got pastoral, you've got the political arm, which we're going to nominate, elect, and lobby politicians for pro-life legislation, ultimately trying to make it illegal. Then you've got the educational arm, which is the arm that I'm in, which is trying to make it unthinkable. Abortion unthinkable. Some people don't want abortion, regardless of whether it's legal, regardless of whether they feel as though it's necessary. They've already made up their mind that abortion is not an option for them before they even find themselves pregnant. And then they're the people that go directly to the pregnancy care center. They're the ones who go and talk to their parents and say, hey, mom, hey, dad, I'm in a bad situation. Can you help me out? And those parents are more than happy, almost universally, to actually help their children care for their grandchildren. And it's an incredible privilege to be part of that educational arm, and also see how it floods into these other two arms. The number of people that we have plugged into the Calgary Pregnancy Care Center or the Cochrane Pregnancy Care Center, a Choice for Two, and the number of people that we have plugged into right now, a great political organization working to nominate and elect folks, and other groups that it's amazing to see that ripple effect. As soon as people realize what is going on in Canada, the barbaric act of ripping a child to pieces, they realize that they have to do something about it, right? This is the human rights violation of our age. This is going to be the stand up and be counted component of our generation of where were you when we were talking about abortion? Were you a leader? Were you a follower? Or were you completely absent? And that's an opportunity that we give passersby and people that we talk to all the time. I think we've trained like 45 or 50 new people in pro-life conversation skills in the last 2 months, just by talking to them on a street corner and helping them realize that they have an obligation to do something about this. And so those are the three arms: pastoral, political, and educational. And it's cool working together with these arms.
So like one thing like I found interesting, like in the conversation I had last night with this pro-abortion person, they kept saying like, like, well, we're in the majority and you guys are just a small group and you'll never overturn anything here in Canada. Obviously that's just like, it's just talk. But one of the things I said is like every major civil rights or human rights movement, from like apartheid in South Africa to the the expulsion of the British colonization in India by the Gandhi and the freedom fighters there, to the obviously the abolition movement in the United States and all that, they all started small and they all looked like they had like an impossible task. Like who like Gandhi, like the people in India never thought like, how in the world are they going to get the British Empire out of like India? They were completely outmatched. They were no way going to be able to win a war against them. So what would they do? And yet it started slow, but it slowly started gaining steam. Eventually, it managed to get what they needed out of it. So in Canada, a lot of people are very I talked to a lot of pro-lifers. A lot of people are very pessimistic about the movement here because obviously in America there's a very large movement, and it's been large for a long time. You see the March for Life in the United States. It has like hundreds of thousands of people every year. They show up and it's like they have like slow motion capture videos of just the waves of crowds going through there. But in Canada, we do have like similar, but not the same numbers. Now, when it comes, because you've been on the front lines, you see all like what's going on. Where do you see the signs of optimism in the Canadian pro-life movement?
Yeah, so I mean, a couple of places. I mean, first and foremost, we see it on street corners day after day, right? That we are tracking conversational outcomes that we have from interactions on street corners and on doorsteps. And what we see is that around 40% of people that we talk to who aren't pro-life already become fully pro-life within the span of a conversation.
Wow.
Which, praise God for that, right? I mean, it's absolutely incredible
fantastic.
to see
what
is happening. And an even higher percentage of people are walking away at least feeling more negatively about abortion, right? That we've got the polling on abortion victim photography, and that 67.3% of people in photography are willing to admit that they feel more negatively about abortion after viewing it than they had before. But also just looking at the membership, right? Like I said, we have our biggest internship that we've ever had right now. We have more and more people who want to get involved. Our volunteer teams are growing across the country. We have churches, we have pro-life groups that are reaching out to us for training and engagement opportunities. Like it's wild, the difference from, I was talking to my colleague Jonathan earlier about how 10 years ago when I got involved, I spent most of my time justifying our strategy to most people that I talked to in the pro-life movement. And now the number of requests that our team has to sit on their board of directors, to come and train their members, to come and help them become more effective. We're seeing people change their mind, and we're seeing many of those people who have changed their mind and have been involved in the pro-life movement for a long time want to be even more effective. Because at the end of the day, I mean, pro-life work is stressful, right? Like it's
Yeah.
one way or another. And so if you're gonna get stressed out anyways, you might as well have the highest return on investment, right? I mean, you go out and do a life chain, you go out and do anything, right? Like you're always a little bit worried about who's gonna say something or shout something or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, You might as well get your best return on investment.
It's so funny. I feel like you have to get me on the on the take or something like that, because I'm the kind of person that I hear conflict and I'm like, oh, conflict, let's go do it.
yeah, Danny will
I will run.
Okay,
because
like
I want to talk to
you.
people.
I know that you really well. Not just that you wanted to talk to people, but the last time that Danny and I were out at a pro-life event, and we told a bit of this story with JoJo and Robin.
Yeah, it was.
But last time we went to Life Chain, which for everybody who's wanting to attend Life Chain, it's on October 2nd.
Woo!
Do you know where it's going to be, Cam? Or have they planned that yet?
It's almost always along the Cloud Trail between Heritage and Southland.
Mm-hmm. That's where it was last time we went.
Yeah.
But yeah, last time we went, Danny and I were interviewing people.
Yes, we were.
We're like, hey, let's actually get some viewpoints from attendees and see how they feel. And then this motorcyclist wanted to interrupt the interview and then crashed into a Toyota Corolla, and it caused this whole thing. But
kerfuffle.
It was a kerfuffle. And like I had my kids there and my kids got sworn at, and I'm like, oh, this is just lovely.
Yep.
Like, there's courageous people across the country that do that year over year over year. And it's difficult to know the outcomes of that. And so I'm not here to shout down Life Chain and whatnot, but we were out in Vancouver 2 weeks ago, and in the span of 1 hour, I talked to 9 people the first day, and I saw 7 of them become fully pro-life. Talked to 9 people the next day, and 3 of them became fully pro-life. Like, there's a lot of people who have never witnessed somebody becoming fully pro-life in the span of a conversation. And at this point in the summer, it is like pulling teeth to get the interns to record their testimony videos because they're so happenstance. Because they're like, oh, whatever. I used the human rights argument, and the guy changed his mind. Like, I've seen this 100 times over. And we have to keep reminding them that the majority of people in Canada's pro-life movement, in the global pro-life movement, haven't been blessed to witness that change because they haven't received that training, because they're not comboing the training with effective exposure tools, all that kind of stuff. And that obviously God's the one that changes hearts and minds, but it's so valuable to be that sharpened and equipped tool that can be an incredible instrument in his hand and get that training and get that kind of engagement strategy that can be effective for changing minds and saving lives.
Yeah, I do believe that one of the most effective tools I found in the pro-life movement is that there are some incredibly powerful and very effective arguments that you can make, and once you learn how to make them, they can be very effective to the point where you're constantly disarming pro-abortion advocates very easily and very quickly, and usually they're usually not prepared. Like Stephen and I had this one very long Facebook conversation with this one, this is a different one, Stephen. But
endlessly.
The person presented 2 major, very common pro-abortion arguments that they always lean on. They think that they're like, ha, this is like my gotcha and nobody will ever answer. Ha ha, I've got those those pro-lifers on the ropes. Ha ha, take this. And so usually the 2 were, the one was you're in an accident and you wake up and you're hooked up to some person and you have to support them. That one. And then the second one is you're in a building, you have to save you can only save a little baby girl or a huge pile of embryos or whatever, and they think that those are super effective. But the problem was that both Stephen and I provided a very solid answer to both objections, and they never give you credit. But at least he did say no. They don't give you credit, and they don't ever be like, well, okay, that's a good answer. They'll never do that. But he did say, okay, well, you were the first people who actually gave me an actual answer to those questions. And I think that's where education is so effective, because you realize very quickly they rely on the same old tired talking points, and they don't even realize how weak their position can be and how incoherent and how it doesn't line up with reality. This is a very common problem I find. So when it comes to the education arm, what do you think? What do you think is the most effective way of training people? What's the most effective approach that you found in helping people to have those conversations?
Absolutely. So there's 2 areas that we really focus on, because I feel like a lot of people are very, very inclined towards going only to the academic route. And we have a lot of really good academic arguments. We have what we call the human rights argument, which is 4 questions that we ask in almost every conversation. Question 1, can we agree that all humans get human rights? Question 2, if something is growing, isn't it alive? Even from 1 cell to 2 cell to 4 cell, we have a living organism. A living organism has human parents. Isn't he or she a living human? And doesn't that make abortion a human rights violation? So we have a lot of very, very common sense kind of academic arguments. The biggest thing that we end up talking about is the human component of the abortion issue, that a lot of people will recognize that they don't have sound arguments. But what they'll cling to is the fact that regardless of whether they are considered a philosopher or an expert biologist or whatever, they have human experiences that have pushed or pulled them towards the pro-abortion movement. And so often, so much of what we're doing is bridging the gap, meeting them where they're at and unpacking, why do you support abortion? Like, help me understand, when did you come to this worldview? What factors pushed you in that direction? What has gone on in your life that has helped you or hindered you from accepting the pro-life worldview? And once we crack open that human component, it's almost always, well, I knew I was pro-choice when I was in grade 10 and my best friend became pregnant and I drove her to the abortion facility. Okay, well, my academic arguments aren't necessarily going to break through because you think that by becoming pro-life, you would have to call your best friend a murderer, or your mom a murderer, or your sister a murderer, or your spouse a murderer. And there's a lot of people that have that human
emotional connection.
I can't get over that. And so when we start unpacking that, when we realize that, like, I know people who have had abortions. I know people from high school. I know people from university. I know people now in my career who have had abortions. And I don't hate them. I'm not condemning them as awful, wicked, terrible people. Obviously, I disagree with their action. Obviously, I want to help them find reconciliation, healing, and help and recovery from that terrible decision. I want to make sure they never make that decision again. I want to make sure they never influence anybody else to make that decision. But once we crack open that human component that goes alongside all of the books, all of the podcasts, all of the articles that have been written about the pro-life issue, and you realize that the person you're talking to isn't a math equation to be cracked, but rather a human being with all these different experiences, then you realize that you don't have to have all of the answers at the tip of your tongue. It certainly helps, but to have a human interaction with them and help them realize that, no, we are out here because when a mom who's got a 2-year-old kid goes through a terrible situation, we don't suggest that she kills her 2-year-old. We help her, we support her, we do whatever we can. And sometimes we're not very good at helping her, but we're going to try our best. And we're never going to suggest that she kills her born child. But we need to double down and offer that same support to pregnant moms and make sure that all of the support that's available to parents of born children is available to parents of preborn children as well. We need to convey that fact that we don't kill innocent humans to solve even the hardest of problems. And so those are kind of the two angles that we approach constantly, that human rights argument, those 4 questions. Would you agree that all humans should get human rights? Something is growing, isn't alive. That living organism has human parents. Isn't he or she a living human? And doesn't that make abortion a human rights violation? Coupled with the human component of, why do you support the pro-abortion worldview and what pushed you in that direction? And let's unpack a lot of the suffering that goes on in our world and how, yes, a pregnant mom in high school who's living in poverty is living an incredibly difficult life. And that problem demands a solution. We don't solve problems by killing innocent humans. As we walk through those two sides, we realize that people often willingly come towards the pro-life worldview. It's not kicking and screaming. It's not a matter of like, well, darn it, you've beaten my best law. Exactly. It's a matter of like, that makes a ton of sense. And the fact that we want to offer better for moms and dads than what the pro-abortion movement does. I mean, not even to mention the fact that after somebody has an abortion, who's the one who picks up the pieces? Pro-life movement, right? You go back to the abortion facility and say, hey, I'm feeling guilty about my abortion. I think that this was a wrong decision.
Like, what are they going to say? We've already milked all the money out of you, so we don't really want you anymore.
Yeah, that they're going to say, you know what? You made the best decision. Don't feel bad. Don't feel guilty. All this kind of stuff. And in what situation do we tell people what they should or shouldn't feel? No, it's the pro-life movement that ends up having to pick up the pieces and help these people kind of cope with this traumatic experience and terrible decision they're going to live with for the rest of their life. And I mean, it's a beautiful opportunity that we have. I work very, very consistently with groups like Silent No More Awareness Campaign and other post-abortive healing groups, but
Mhm.
helping folks realize that this is something that impacts the lives of countless people. Abortion kills children. Because abortion kills children, it harms mothers and fathers and siblings and all other members of society.
Mhm.
And we are living in a culture of walking wounded. We have 1 out of 4 women by the age of 40 are going to have at least one abortion. Almost 40% of women who have one abortion are going to have multiple abortions.
Mhm.
And like we are living in a world that is an absolute wasteland of battered corpses who've been killed by abortion or have chosen abortion. And so we got to start from the ground up and start building a humane society that doesn't waver on its principles, but
Mhm.
does reach out even further on that bridging the gap component of meeting people where they're at, taking the high road, and not saying, well, that's a dumb argument, or a third grade could see through that necessarily, but like, what's motivating this? What's
Yes.
motivating your creative attempts at trying to justify abortion?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Because,
It's like
like
it's
we said
getting
earlier,
behind the like making persuasive arguments, not just good arguments. That's kind of like
Yeah.
what
exactly.
your approach is like, going
Winning
for.
people, not just arguments.
That's right.
Yes.
So one thing I was going to ask is like, so obviously Roe v. Wade, it's kind of the biggest news that came, like, well, not Roe v. Wade, the Dobbs decision that took away Roe v. Wade in the United States. Now that was by far one of the biggest tidal waves that has hit, like, like the pro-life movement in like probably our lifetimes for a lot of us. And it had a big effect everywhere, not just in the States, but Europe, like, European leaders, like the French Prime Minister, or President, or Prime Minister. I'm not sure if Macron is President.
Macron is president.
Oh, President. Okay. And then other countries have
Nope.
condemned it. Obviously, Trudeau came out and he went on like, like, oh, like, those terrible like judges and all that. So the question I always like to ask is, there's two possibilities that this wave has potentially caused. Number one, it may galvanize the pro-abortion movement and make them more aggressive and more aggressive in opposing pro-life movement and all that. The other possibility is that it galvanizes pro-life movement, and particularly anybody who wants to get into it, thinking, oh wow, look at this momentum, and people want to get involved more, and there's more opportunity for conversations. What do you like, based on what you've seen in the last couple of weeks and all that? What do you think has been the bigger impact? Has it galvanized the opponents, or has it galvanized the pro-lifers? Okay, did you hear the question, Cameron? We
Nope.
lost him.
Sorry, guys.
He's
Connection
still there.
issues. It's okay.
Connection issues.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Yes,
you.
we hear you now. We hear you now. Do you hear us?
And now we've lost his video temporarily.
No.
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 Oh, and now we're getting it back for bits and pieces. It's not a proper video call without technical issues. So now we just need to do 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 do.
No, you need the guy with like technical difficulty sign on, like, like, oh, please,
Yeah.
please stand by. We have
Please
technical
stand by.
difficulties.
Well, I'm sure that Cam will sort things out. But yeah, like even discussing with you and I, it's been interesting because, of course, the vitriol of the pro-abortion movement has certainly grown more violent in its rhetoric and more extreme in its purpose, almost. In that they're like, well, we've lost the United States in terms of this, and now we don't need to fight for hearts and minds anymore. We're just going to terrorize pro-lifers.
Yeah.
And then, of course, in Canada, they're like, we haven't lost the battle yet, and we're going to make sure the Canadians never, ever have laws against abortion. I think Kem is back now.
He's back. He's switching
I hope so.
it up.
Sorry about that, guys.
No worries. If I'll put it this way, Cameron. Louder with Crowder had a video interview with like Ted Cruz, I think, and even they had like technical difficulties with the video. So it's literally this is a hallmark of
Rite of
any
passage
type of like,
almost.
rite of passage, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the question I posed earlier is: do you believe that the Dobbs decision has galvanized the pro-abortion opponents, or has it done more to galvanize the pro-lifers in Canada?
I think it's a really good question. I think that it's done both. I think
Mhm.
that there is a lot of fear amongst abortion advocates in Canada because they thought that Roe v. Wade would never be overturned. They thought this was the golden calf that would never be overturned, that it was sacred and protected, nothing could ever overturn it. And they're worried, and for a lot of people, both pro-life and pro-abortion, they don't understand how the political system in Canada works. That they're worried
Yeah.
of like, what kind of political case is going to have to happen in Canada for
Mhm.
this to get overturned, and that's not how it's going to work, unfortunately.
Yeah. And of course, we are trying, just as kind of a side note, as far as the legal aspect of abortion in Canada, we are continually trying to schedule something with both Right Now and We Need a Law to have a discussion like we're having with Cam right now to discuss the legal aspect and how, of course, we can progress towards potentially making abortion laws here in Canada. But please continue, Cam.
Oh, and I think that's a great point, that in Canada it's going to be a political action and not a legal action that limits abortions in Canada. But I feel like this has galvanized pro-lifers as well, in so much as, like we mentioned earlier, there's a lot of pro-lifers that have given up. Right? There's a lot of pro-lifers that have figured, you know what, I'm going to do my do necessary as a Christian. I'm going to go out to a life chain. I'm going to throw $10 towards pregnancy care center, whatever, and just tick off that box. But nothing's ever going to change. There's no hope for the pro-life movement. Therefore, I'm going to dedicate my time and energy towards causes that I do think can change, whether that's human trafficking, whether that's um, schooling, education rights, all that kind of stuff. Like there's a lot of noble causes out there, but I think this has really woken up a lot of Canadian pro-lifers to the fact that this could change, that there are no guarantees on this. It's going to take an awful lot of work, and this wasn't lightning on a blue sky for the American pro-life movement, and that's why we had Eric Scheidler and Father Frank Pavone and a few guys on the Pro-Life Guys podcast to just talk about how, let's talk about what went in to this Dobbs decision and how this has been 35 years in the making, and the volume of pro-lifers. You mentioned the volume of people who are doing the March for Life in Washington. Just as an anecdote, think about the number of pro-lifers that go out and do 40 Days for Life. They go out, they do CCBR style activism with a group like Created Equal or CBR in the States or whatever. Christians, pro-lifers in the States are far more engaged on the issue because they've had a lot more reason for hope. They've seen state legislation pass, they've put in the work, and now they're seeing the rewards. And I feel like there's a lot of Canadians that have been galvanized by this, but we need to orient ourselves to the fact that, yes, we need to pray more, but let's not just pray of like, please God, send this same lightning storm to Canada and somehow overturn all of the pro-abortion stuff in Canada without me lifting a finger or talking to my neighbor or anything. Like, I feel like there's a lot more pro-lifers that are reaching out to us now with an idea of hope. And now they're just coming to terms with the amount of work that is going to go into making that hope a reality.
Yeah, as long as people get in, like, as long as everybody gets involved, it's not one person that will overturn and make the whole thing change. It's a community and an entire organization of people all working in tandem, all working together to make this hurt. Like, I think one mistake people make often is they think abolition, like the abolition of slavery was done by one person, William Wilberforce, but he was a part of an entire network of people that all worked like in this massive, and they worked for years to try to make those things happen. It was not like something that he managed to do in a year. It took decades of effort, and just because it takes a lot of time does not mean there's not work that's not worth doing, right? But I think one place where I find a lot of optimism is the fact that Canada is in a very unique position in the fact that we are next to one of the most, basically the most trailblazing country in the world for the pro-life movement is the United States, and we are on their doorstep, and we have a massive connection to the American pro-life movement. There's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of cooperation, and I do believe that the more the more the pro-life issue becomes a bigger issue going forward in the States, I think that's going to spill over in Canada. So I think people are right in believing that that there's an interconnectedness between the United States and Canada that is undeniable. And I think a lot of the success in the States will spill over into Canada.
I hope so. I think that there's a lot of Canadians that have a reticence towards identifying too much with some parts of the state. Like we are the ugly cousin or whatever you want to call it to the states, and
we're the little brother who decided like we just never want to move out. Eventually, like mom basically said like, okay, fine.
Mom just like, fine, you can have your own place. I'll put you up in the garage.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, so many Canadians want to identify with the New York of the states and not with the Austin, Texas, or Houston of the states. And so I feel like even in the pro-life movement, we have an awful lot to learn from Americans when it comes to the political process. We have an awful lot to learn. It's funny that you mentioned that. I thought you were going down the route that I've heard so often from like CBC and CTV of like, well, how much of your funding is funneled here from the American pro-life movement? And like,
how dare you?
Less than one. I would. If you have American listeners, I would love to see that flood of Americans.
Flood of Americans just donating to CCBR.
Don't get me wrong.
I got my new dollar bill. It's got a Trump on it. It's great. There you go. Trump money. Here's the Trump bucks.
I would love to see some of that because that is one of the biggest stumbling blocks of the pro-life movement.
Yeah.
Right. That for a lot of churches, they're hesitant to donate towards the pro-life movement. For a lot of individuals and whatnot, in the States, I mean, churches partner with pro-life organizations all the time, and it's much closer to the heart of the people because it's been preached from pulpits, because it has been a central item for so many folks for so long. And that's Canada's duty. Like the reason we're so far behind the pro-life movement in the States is because of the educational arm of the pro-life movement. We haven't prioritized this. We haven't dedicated our time. We have been, and I count myself among them, for so long that I wish that there was a billboard that would change everybody's mind for me. I wish that I didn't have to have conversations with my neighbor.
If only you could get a Hypnotoad billboard on there. Pro-life. Everyone must be pro-life.
It would be so convenient if life changed everybody's mind. But at the end of the day, people change their minds based on human interaction. And there's going to be tools like abortion victim photography that push people in that direction. But even then, like our polling showed that while 67.3% of people were willing to admit they felt more negatively about abortion after seeing an image of a child killed by abortion, it was significantly insignificant when it came to them actually changing their mind fully on abortion. And so we need to have the conversation, and the conversations are awkward unless you get the training that you need. And it's not just about throwing cherry bombs into your office lunchroom of like, hey, so why do you guys all love murdering babies? Like that might be probably not be the catalyst.
So you're saying I should stop doing that? Okay, good to know.
I
am glad I got. This is very important. Like
I'm glad
that you're like willing to speak the truth to me.
Your coworkers are predominantly Christian, but see, you're fine.
Well, no, I work in the construction industry. Like there's a lot of non-Christians there. So
okay,
but you're right.
Your industry is very different than my industry. My industry is just like you even mentioned God. They're like, you're the Christian, and I'm like, yes, I am.
You're one of those God-loving people, aren't you? How dare you? So, Cameron, one thing I wanted to ask you is, obviously, we like for the last couple of years, and also recently, you see a lot of like the people on the streets, people who are having conversations, who are using the CCBR. Like the imagery and all that kind of stuff. You see a lot of them being attacked. Okay, so a couple of years ago, there was that girl that was on the street. I think it was
in Toronto. Yep,
and she got kicked, like roundhouse kicked by that one guy. There was recently a girl who was actually
attacked just last week.
Yeah, like last week, she like had her phone snapped out of her hand. But the one that I found really interesting, and I hadn't seen it before, the guy decided that as a way of retaliating against these women. He basically put out like hardcore porn and started trying to show it to them, as a way of showing like, well, you're gonna show me something graphic, I'm gonna show you something graphic, even though it wasn't the same. Now, what is how is CCBR and other pro-life organizations, how are they handling, and how do you train your people to handle those kind of situations? Because obviously, I mean, when I watch something like that, a guy going up to a woman and physically, like, threatening her and physically attacking her, Like my instinct as a man is if I was there, I would punch that guy out. I would, because like I feel like don't mess with a woman. Like I don't care how angry you are. Like don't do it. Like that's the instinct that I get as a man who wants to protect, who actually feels like that need to protect women. Because I care about women and children, and you don't mess with women, right? Now, how does CCBR and other pro-life organizations, how do you handle this?
It's a great question. We have a very comprehensive incident protocol. We have we were dealing with an incident from earlier today, actually, where somebody threw a bottle of water at us, and we've got a very thorough incident protocol on a bunch of different levels of incidents that are. We have a fantastic relationship with the Calgary Police Services.
Cool.
And so they're often very, very efficient in returning our calls and responding on scene. We've had lots of meetings with their team. Because we take a very professional approach to our displays and events that we're doing. We're not out here lobbing Molotov cocktails at people. We're not out here torching police cars. We are just trying to have meaningful interactions, and we've had a great amount of support from them. We always have a security camera rolling to capture what's going on. They often stay well out of the range of attack sort of thing, so they can capture everything. We have people who can call the cops if we need to. But thankfully, at least in Calgary here, we've been so present, and a lot of the training is how to prevent the escalation of conversation in the first place. And I'm not saying that people who get attacked, it's their fault because they didn't prevent the escalation. Obviously, there's only so much that you can do, and some people have a bee in their bonnet, and they're just going to come out and lash out because of a personal experience or whatever. That we often think about the way that we engage the culture is turning a bright light on in the dark room. Right, that when your spouse, your kid, or whomever flips the light on in the morning, and you're like, oh my goodness, turn that light off. Like it's painful, and yet in the absence of that light, we have an entire society that's bumbling around, smashing into stuff, hurting themselves, killing their children, and so we try to process things right off the hop. We have a good analysis of who is interacting with the display. We have a leader who's constantly aware of what's going on and who's interacting with the different volunteers, intern staff, whomever they may be. We have self-defense training that we'll often go through just to make sure that we can get out of those bad situations and get ourselves into a safe situation. And thankfully, through a lot of those efforts, we've just avoided all of these, or a huge number of incidents that I'm sure could have gone a lot worse. We've done close to 500 of our street level activism events in the last 3 years, and I think we've had 2 incidents, maybe 3. And that comes from being diligent in how we follow up with the police and pressing charges whenever we're able to. That goes into our demeanor and how we're interacting with people and how we're making sure that we're managing our conversations. There's a lot that goes into it. But at the end of the day, God is just very good in keeping our team members safe. And I'm glad that when those who are assaulted, attacked, harassed, whatever it may be, that many police services are very willing and very efficient in following up with that.
Good, yeah, because like the one thing I noticed, and this has been a hallmark, not just even the pro-life movement, but generally in politics, is that whenever like an incident like happens of any kind, if the conservative person reacts in a like negative way or something like that, or usually like a tit for tat way, then everyone will jump on them and they'll be like, "Oh, look at this horrible person." Like if let's say for example somebody gets like the Nick Sandman, for example, which would be a great example in the States, a kid who was being basically harassed by like a native protester and all that, and he became the target of like the attacks. And so one thing I always think of in like the pro-life movement here in Canada, particularly with the media the way it is that even if you're justified in your response, the media, the second that you respond in anything other than a totally non-confrontational way, they will jump on it and be like, "Oh, look at this terrible, horrible person," and how they're like, exactly.
And that's why again, like I know that you were saying it tongue in cheek, like we're not going to punch out somebody who attacked even a most vulnerable person. Like we are going to have
to deserve
how to get that person out of that situation. How do we make sure that they're safe and that we document it and that person gets apprehended? But yeah, we're not going to be rating blow for blow. We're not going to be chasing them down. wrestling stuff. I mean, that's a difficult pill for a lot of people to swallow, right? That we were in outreach in Vancouver, and we had a couple people that came and tried to steal our signs.
Yeah.
And it's tempting to be like, no, these are my signs. Let go of them.
You give it back.
But at the end of the day, I don't want to get into a wrestling match and have somebody fall over into the street and get run over or something.
Mm-hmm.
So after one decent, like, no, these are mine. Okay, no, you're going to wrestle with me for them. Take them. And thankfully, we were able to recover all of them. There was no significant damage, all that kind of thing. But having that approach is going to mitigate a lot of escalation as well, because I'm not super interested going blow for blow with somebody. I'll do it if I have to, obviously, but
Obviously, if the situation, if you're in a like a very dangerous situation, they're threatening to like physically harm you, then you have to do something. Quick question: do you recommend to all of your employees to basically get like really good phone cases to, it's just to be like kind of like, oh, you don't have a phone case? Yeah, you should bring your phone. It's not going to last.
Yeah. I mean, we use a full-blown camcorder for all of our recording, just so it's a little bit higher quality and a little bit higher storage, things like that. But and again, they're often situated a little bit further away so that they fly under the radar a little bit more, and it's not. I mean, I've seen it done before where the camera person gets right up in their face, and obviously that's a little bit irritating as well, obviously. And so, trying to have a good perspective on that, and then just being smart, being commonsensical when it comes to how do I make sure that that one blow doesn't turn into 10 blows? How do I make sure that one coffee that gets thrown at us doesn't turn into something worse? How do I make sure that a threat doesn't turn into an action? All that kind of stuff. And I mean, most new communities that we go into, we have a sit-down meeting with the police services, like I mentioned, to make sure they know how we're conducting ourselves, what our code of conduct is, what our policies are, and all this stuff. So they know that we're the good guys, that we're not the ones instigating stuff. We're not the ones who are starting the brawls or anything like that. If anything transpires, it's because our opponents are lashing out at us, not vice versa.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, and unfortunately, Cam, you had notified me that you're a little bit short on time today, so that's where the interview is that's where this discussion is gonna end. We thank you for joining us. Just kind of a last addendum. How can people support CCBR, and of course, where can people find the Pro Life Guys podcast?
100%. So you can donate on our website, which is endthekilling.ca. For CCBR, we're the parent company of the Pro Life Guys podcast. You can go to our podcast website at prolifeguys.com. You can find all of our episodes there. You can find us on all major podcasting platforms and all that kind of stuff. You can find us on YouTube. And if you want to support the show specifically, you can go to patreon.com/prolifeguys.
Sweet. All right.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Cameron.
Yeah, we really enjoyed having you. And eventually we hope to have you on again, maybe sometime in the future. But
we have to get a round table of like 50 people, 50 pro-life like leaders.
That'll just be chaos.
Jonathan Van Maren is like fighting with Lila Rose for the microphones. Like, it's my turn to answer. That'd be great.
Daddy's dreaming a little too big.
Come on, you got to aim high, man. Be optimistic.
That is the coolest part about running a pro-life podcast, that I've gotten to meet all of my heroes. And that's the thing, right? Like you get one person on, and then you just leverage their name to another person. I've had Lila Rose on the show. I've had Mark Crutcher and Father Frank Pavone and all these folks that like I've read their books, and I'm just fanboying through the whole thing, and now they're calling me back. Like it's really cool. Josh Brahm is a great asset. I talk pretty regular now, and so reach for the stars. I'm sure that if you reach out and face them, you never know what'll happen.
Oh yeah, we both have like goals of like pro-life people which we want to interview. Like for me, I want to interview Laura Clausen. I've always wanted to interview Laura Clausen. I met her once, and then Danny. Danny wants to intervw Seamus.
And Seamus, I want
Seamus Coughlin from Freedom Tunes.
Love that guy. He's on. He used to be a mainstay on Timcast IRL, but he's both hilarious and very insightful.
He is.
I like him. So I think this is what I like. Like people, when they hear, the more they hear pro-life pro-life arguments, the more encouraged they are. Not only about the movement, but also about their ability to have these conversations.
when they realize that they don't have to be a superhero to do this, that
Yeah.
everyday people are changing hearts and minds, and that, I mean, one thing that I'm doing a crash course up in Lacombe on Saturday. So whenever this gets posted on Saturday, the July 30th, I'm doing a crash course up in Lacombe for 20 or so people, and a huge part of it is just a matter of pro-lifers aren't radical.
Yep.
You're not the weirdo in your workspace, in your family, in your church community, whatever it may be, for thinking that it's not appropriate to rip the arms and legs off a tiny human being to solve a problem. And that's not a radical take. That is a very sensible take.
Yeah, Stephen got accused of like being an extremist for not like for suggesting that his daughter, if
in
like,
this
you know,
extreme hypothetical situation,
extreme hypothetical, that he wouldn't encourage his daughter to get an abortion if she got like pregnant. I'm like, that's not the extreme position. The extreme position is not calling for the death penalty of the child.
100%. 100%.
All right. All right. Well, thank you for coming, and we hope you have a great evening. And of course, good luck in the comb.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Thank you both for having me, and I wish you all the best for the upcoming episodes.
Yeah,
Cameron,
thank you.
only one last thing, Cameron, for you is I got to do the Wayne's World shout out. Like, we're not worthy. We're not worthy. We're scum. We're trash. No, I really appreciate people like you who are doing like the hard work. So that's kind of my way of saying thank you for all you do.
My pleasure. It's a joy to be able to. I mean, it's the most fulfilling work that you could do.
Yes.
Right. That I know lots of people who have worked in other capacities and other jobs and careers and whatever. And how many people they get to come home at the end of the day and say, "A baby's been saved because of where I was and what I said," or "I saw this other people change their minds." Like, it's the most fulfilling work out there. Yeah. It's incredibly challenging at times, but it is. The rewards cannot be paralleled. So
keep up the good work, bro.
Yep.
Love it.
All right.
All right. God bless you both and everyone in the audience.
Indeed. All right.